Welcome, everybody. This is Darren Klum with a new episode of Secured 2 Tech Talks. In this episode, I can't wait to have this conversation. So we've got a couple of security nerds here, myself and Chris Cathers, who's our guest today. What's interesting is Chris, and we're going to get into pretty deep here what you do and how you do it and how you see the security market. But you share my passion, and that passion is how do we protect today's companies and how do we prevent them from being the next headline in the newspaper saying, you know, you've been breached and now millions of dollars have been lost and all this data and valuable information's in the wild and the reputations of these companies are harmed. And, you know, and I think that's what I'm excited to talk about today. I mean, I just think we really have a great conversation teed up today around this topic. And so, Chris, your background, you started out with a company called Assurity River Group, and you and I are both very good friends with the CEO of that company, Jeff Olenek, and so we go back a long time. You've been with Dell RSA, and then most recently you were with Swimlane. You've had literally marquee jobs within the security industry. Why the heck would you leave those companies to the unknown of being now the founder and CEO of Octellient? Why did you?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me here today, Darren. Appreciate the opportunity. It's really good to kind of chat on this topic. It is something that I, share that passion with you about. Through my course of the last 15 years or so in security, really found some challenges with the complexity that we've continued to add into the marketplace. Yeah. Right. And working in those marquee jobs, at RSA, they're solving some really good problems. They're taking a business first approach to security, similar to what we're doing here at Octellient. And, I saw this opportunity with people that security folks, IT folks that are responsible for security in the mid-market, really feeling like they're on a bit of an island. They're having to make decisions. It may not be their only job, meaning security. They don't necessarily know where to turn, right? They may have a peer group that they are involved in or call up their peers, but they have their own challenges going on, right? Their peers' job isn't necessarily to help them solve their problem, right? They're dealing with their own issues.
Oh, that's right.
They may call up a traditional security vendor who, really is going to just sell them a service, sell them a project, right? Most traditional security vendors are project oriented. That's how they monetize their services.
Yeah. And they typically sell what they know too, right? So it may not be what's best for you, it's what they know. And
right.
And you and I have had that conversation before where it's just like you go, golly, they're just selling stuff to sell stuff and it's just layer upon layer of crap and there's really no strategy behind it, right? It's just, throwing a bunch of Band-Aids on stuff and hoping they work, right?
Absolutely. They get a report with a bunch of recommendations and then they're left sitting here going, what do I do with all of these, right? That's not really helping me solve the problem that I had in front of me.
Right.
So we had a vision here at Octellient of really helping those folks, being advisors, being trusted advisors to the mid-market, helping them really propel their information security programs forward, utilizing a business-first approach to do that, and just walking them arm in arm with them through this process.
Yeah. And so, and you touch on an interesting topic because the challenge that I constantly see in the marketplace today is, we have a bunch of companies, they all know the risks, they know there's problems, they have a million different people telling them different things. Typically, the senior execs of the company have no idea about what security even is or how the technologies work. And then the other challenge, there's just such a shortage of really good technologists. When you look at your company, what are you doing to help solve that problem? Because, to me, there's just so much out there, so much, FUD and baloney and crappy, I would almost call it snake oil. We've talked about that a lot before. There's a lot of snake oil in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you cut through the crap? And how are you supporting these companies that may not have the right resources or knowledge?
Right. That's a great question. And that really is, we're doing that with Propulsion. Propulsion is that expert advisor service.
Yeah.
It's a minimum year-long partnership, really bring expertise and guidance on demand to them. And the first thing we do is create this 8-point dossier, right? It's our own focus on 8 broad categories within your information security program. And the first piece of that really is aligning and ensuring there is alignment between the business and risk.
Yes.
So that the business understands, right?
Yeah.
Security is a business issue. It's not necessarily a technology issue.
Right.
It's been stuffed under technology for a long time. It's starting to bubble up to the boardroom and has been for the last number of years. And I think that's only excelling, in its pace. But it really is ensuring that you have that business and risk alignment first and foremost.
Yeah.
allowing security to be at the table. And I think that's a really key, important piece, because, we talk about a lot of challenges, even from a technology, and you and I were talking about this yesterday morning, right? Patching. Well, great. There's going to be systems that I can't patch.
Yep.
Whether the hardware that the application is running on doesn't support it, or whether it would break one of my business processes if I did an integration on the backside, something of that sort. We just need to close that loop, right? That loop of back to communication to the business and to technology to say, okay, here are the reasons why. This is how it should impact risk, or these are the risks to it. Now, business, you make the decision on what we should do about that.
Yeah, so this leads into something, and you touched on it. I think you and I would both agree. Security is really a two-part problem, right? You have the technologies that enable security, and then you have the proper, what I would call the education and understanding of how to operate properly, right? So you kind of have a human element and a technology element, and then you have to kind of bring those two things together. And this leads into, how the heck do we find security again? Now, I have my own opinions, and I know you have yours, but in a kind of as you look at your business, how do we find security again? How do we get back to building trust within these digital systems that has been completely lost?
Yeah, it comes down to getting back to basics. What's really important for the organization?
That's right.
Right. Just because it's the new fandangled attack vector that's out there doesn't necessarily mean that you're a target, right? You may not even be running those types of systems that are being exploited. So having an understanding and knowing what your assets are in your environment, knowing what you're doing, how you're configuring things, right, becomes very important to getting us back to basics.
Now, would you say so when you say back to basics, and this is kind of advice I give people, and maybe this is good advice or maybe it's bad advice, but does it really come down to the use cases? Does it really come down to how are your employees and people, and how are you using these technologies, and what is the use case? Because you can't protect against threat vectors unless you understand the use case. And now with kind of all these employees being scattered all over the place, what would you tell a business owner that's trying to find a better way to protect themselves, and especially as we're sitting here in the middle of a pandemic with employees in their homes or who knows where? What would you recommend for those types of scenarios, and how do you look at security in those scenarios?
So there's We talk about risk a lot, right? You just kind of mentioned that, right? The way you just explained that is really about understanding the risk to your organization, right? What are the people, the technology that exist that we're running? What are the threats that that we have as an organization? Understanding those and being able to then direct in the appropriate decision. Um, aligning with the business on that, as we mentioned, and knowing what the business's tolerance is for that risk.
Right. No,
From
that's
there,
right.
then we can make some decision and determination on what is appropriate. Um, you know, there still is not a replacement for a defense in depth type of strategy, right? The whole idea is to slow the attackers down. But the next phase of that is then understanding, how do we detect abnormalities in our environment, right? What are the
Yeah.
technologies that we're using after we've understood what our normal environment looks like, that we can then look for those anomalies? And
Right.
then how do we respond appropriately, right? So we know that we can't protect against everything. I think Bruce Schneier says it perfect, right? We can no longer protect. All we can do is detect and respond.
Right.
I don't believe that,
No,
as I
no.
mentioned, that's a replacement for defense in depth, right? Or preventative controls. But it certainly raises the question that we need to be able to identify when we have attackers in our environment, potentially, and what to do about it.
Right. So now I went on a rant the other day. So, I went on one of those where you just start writing and then all your frustrations after years of watching customers getting, ripped off by, ultra expensive security consultants. You probably read my tirade, which, is one of those things where you post it and you go, I don't know if I'm going to piss people off, but I think I may have just pissed some people off. Um, but it's true. And I've looked at consulting, and I think consulting has been a big part of our security problem, because I think that for whatever reason, people feel that when there is no security, that suddenly they're going to, call, consultant 911, and they're going to solve every problem. And suddenly now they're going to be secure. And because they've got their beautiful, packet of information, they now have a paper shield. We know that doesn't work anymore. I that's kind of my frustration, is that when a technology is completely broken, you have no security, and then that means that you suddenly now spend all this money on consulting. One of the things that has been refreshing about what you're doing is, even though you could maybe say you're a consultant, I really don't see you as that. I see you more of a coach and more of an advisor, and really somebody who looks at this mess that we're in a different light, and I think has really put a way to help educate. Because I think don't you think education is really what a lot of the problem is? Like, do you know how many people just don't even do simple, proper internet hygiene? They don't go to trusted. I mean, they don't look for the web address that has HTTPS when they're doing things, because when there's an S, it's secure, or
Right.
clicking on files in email or links. I mean, just simple things, but people they fall for it all the time. And email is one of the greatest gateways to hackers in the world. So I guess my question to you is, what makes you different than the usual consultant? Because that's not what you are. But what makes you different? I
Yeah.
really teed
Well,
you up on that one.
yeah, no, you did. Appreciate that. I just want to rewind a little bit and say, yeah, people are our weakest link, right? We are ultimately all responsible uh, for security, right? And here being October, being National Cybersecurity Month, Awareness Month, got a blog coming out next week. Talks just about that topic, right? What are some of the things that we can really do? So, basically, the topic next week is, if you connect it, protect it, and that
Right.
includes all of us as people doing our part. Um,
Right.
so, what makes Octellient different is really the fact that it is a hand in hand, right? It's really helping. It's not taking the consultant approach of, here's what we found, here you go, here's a report, right? It really is taking that coach and advisor um, approach that you just mentioned to say, ultimately, I want to make the people that are responsible for security in these organizations better. And I want to do that by helping them and be arm in arm with them to help them solve those issues, to give them the expert advice from our advisors, and to let them really drive that in their organization, make them the shining star. This isn't about us. This isn't about Octellient being the shining star. This isn't about the people at Octellient being the shining star. This is about our customers really shining.
Right. Now, what's interesting too, and I think, we've also talked about this in the past, is I think what you do a really nice job of is simplifying and demystifying the security, because I think what's happened there's been like this, what I would call a security arms race, where you have these companies that just keep thinking they can spend their way out of the problem, and you're just adding more and more layers and different things. And suddenly now you have this massive hodgepodge that you have to manage. And, the poor guys in security in these companies, or IT directors, they're so overwhelmed. There's no way they can manage it all. And I think that your ability to break this down into simple, actionable items has really been what's impressed me of what you do. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how you kind of simplify this process? Because again, I think a big part of why security is failing in a lot of large companies is that it's just become too overwhelming to manage. How do we simplify? How do we simplify that security platform in a company?
Yeah, it comes down to really understanding, and in our opinion, 8 broad categories. We've kind of knocked this one around a little bit already today around business and risk alignment, but also understanding your assets and the class and the configuration of those, right? So having that stuff and knowing those items, having a good identity and access strategy, right? And I know I want to touch on this a little bit more with you as well, and your solutions and how they're solving, things around access and data protection, et cetera. Yeah. And we've got detection and response, right? So what do you have in place? And it doesn't have to be this big, broad set of tools to be able to understand that, right? Just knowing what's happening at the endpoint. That's the most important piece, right? That's where everybody's working from. If we can understand what's going on at the endpoint, we're a lot farther down the road than we think we are. Continuity and recovery, having some strategy around that. Ransomware is a real thing. Yeah, we have to know how we have to know how we're going to be able to recover from that. And so having solutions in place around that, having that testing and assessment and doing it in the right way, right? Having the ability to understand the results and do something with those results to improve your program. Communication and training is a huge piece of, and as you mentioned, right? Helping people to understand what their role in security is, helping them to understand what they should be looking for. I think we've got to be more consistent, right? I've seen a lot of organizations
should participate, right? I mean, everybody should participate in an organization. Yeah, absolutely.
From executive leadership all the way down to the mailroom clerk,
right?
If it still exists, right?
Right.
It is everybody's job, and there's some proven statistics that are showing that every 6 months may be too short or too long of a time, right? We should be doing this on a quarterly basis. We should be reinforcing, because as time goes by, we reinforce it through training, and then it goes away and people fall back into their former habits. And then ensuring we've got the proper metrics and reporting in place so that we can communicate and close that loop back up to senior leadership, business leaders, board of directors.
Right. And then I think there's a logical segue here into, what are technologies that you're seeing that are working? Because, again, we've touched a lot on kind of what I would call the top layer, right? It's just, being smart and training people and educating and getting them up to speed. But, there is that technology element, and security, and a big part of it revolves around those technologies doing their job. What's working right now, and what's not working?
Yeah.
I don't know. Big question, right? I mean,
it is. It's a big question, right? And I think if we all had a crystal ball, we'd be able to answer that perfectly. The reality is, I think it's different for every organization on what's right for them based on the risks that they're faced with and the threats that they're faced with.
Right. So you're thinking security really, though, is not a one size fits all. I mean, it's not like I'm just gonna, what works for ABC company is not going to work for XYZ company, right? I mean, it's really based on use cases and the types of data and information and the systems that they have. I mean, is that kind of what I'm hearing from you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Everybody's slightly different.
I think everybody is slightly different.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see some pretty robust security programs in Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 organizations.
Yeah.
With hundreds of people supporting that. And much of that is both on the layered security and on the detection. I mean, the Fortune companies are driving towards more and more detection and response, and being able to understand what's going on in their environment. There's this big push in the market around threat hunting, and what does that do for your organization, right? We know we've got controls in place and ways to identify the known bad, but how do we identify the unknown bad? Right.
Yeah,
in order to do that, we have to know what our environment looks like and how it operates first and foremost, and then be able to detect those anomalies and respond to them.
And I've got kind of a slanted opinion on security itself, because to me it's always about the data. How do you protect data, and that's the approach that I've gone, is like, I just look at it, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, hack matters when somebody gets something, right? Somebody breaking in, that's one thing, but them getting something of value, that's the part that I've looked at. I'm like, how do we solve that problem? And what we do at Secured 2, and our whole business is really focused on the data side of things, and how do we protect data, and how do we start assigning roles to who has access to what, and really understanding what kind of data has value and what doesn't have value. What we do. Do you feel that our approach, as we're looking at security, is the right approach? And I've never asked you this because, I know we're friends, but what do you think of our security? And do you feel that the encrypted systems that we have are vulnerable? And do you feel like, this approach that we have is the right approach of really getting into companies and locking down the data so it cannot be hacked?
Well, there's a big push by certain nation states on the quantum computing, and it's been reported. It is real. Those capabilities exist today. I know you've been talking about it for years. And years ago, when you first started talking about it, I kind of just shook my head and was like, yeah, right. But the reality is, you saw the future and you saw it coming. And so, encryption at its root is just a mathematical equation, and math can be solved. I mean, we see that with passwords. I remember back in the day, we created a password cracker with a video card.
Oh, gee.
and within minutes would be able to crack passwords.
Anything, right? And people don't know that, right? I mean, people think that, I'll just do a really long password. It doesn't work.
Well, it certainly helps, right? I mean, going from 6 characters to 8 characters to 10 certainly increases the time that it takes. But do these attackers, are they really under the gun with time?
No.
And they have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
So does it really matter from that perspective? So, I think taking it from a data approach, and ultimately you're exactly right. How do we If the attackers get in, great, big deal, right? We
Yeah,
want
they
to be
do
able to
nothing.
identify and
Right.
stop them before they can take that data out. If they do happen to get the data and it is in such a format that it's deemed useless to them, have we done our job? Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's how we've looked at it, right? It's and what's kind of also interesting is we've and you share this and agree with this philosophy too. My whole thing is how do we want to push the risk to an endpoint of a company so the company can build the capability at the endpoint to monitor, to watch, to control. Where control is lost is the minute you ship something across the World Wide Web and have it live in some other storage container you don't control, right? So that's we've said, well, let's solve the over the wire and at rest somewhere problem, which we've done elegantly. But I think that what I love about what you do is you're helping build the castle that's where the endpoint is and making sure that the people that are in the endpoint behind the castle wall and all the things in the castle ensure that if a big army shows up and tries to break in, they're not going to get anything. And to me, that's what I love about the approach that you've come up with is really, how do you deal with that endpoint in a better way? And so I guess, a next segue would be is, arming yourself with knowledge is very important. What would be some recommended, reads or things that you would want to have people look at out in the like in YouTube for videos on security? I mean, are there any resources that for somebody that's just kind of trying to figure this out and get better understanding, where do they get some information, to better their knowledge of security? Or is there any authors? I know you mentioned Bruce Schneier. I love him too. He's great.
Yeah,
He's
Schneier's
from
got
Minnesota,
some.
by the way. You know that?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
he's
still
Minnesotan.
lives here? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
he still lives here. Yep.
Huh,
Yep.
interesting.
See, all good people in security are from Minnesota. Come on.
Wait, come on, this is just flyover country.
Yeah, yeah, we're flyover. We're not Silicon Valley.
Right.
By the way, I'm gonna. Okay, you just struck a chord with me. Do you know what actually has been built and comes from Minnesota? I mean, Minnesota is literally was Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley was Silicon Valley. Do you know that?
I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the advancements in computing from Cray to, all the big companies, the military industrial complex sits here. And I think one of the reasons why Minnesota gets zero credit for anything of the technology revolution, which we should, is because we're a military town, surprisingly. And so a lot of the
Hmm.
stuff that gets built here that is used for everything was basically hidden because of its military. So there's kind of this really weird dynamic here in this town that nobody knows about. But anyway, I had to share since you touched that point.
Yeah,
Um,
I read
yeah.
somewhere about some underground bases, and there's a whole
Oh, there is. It's crazy.
series of them around the state. Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. Shh. You can't talk about
Right.
it. But anyway, back to it. What would you recommend for somebody just wanting to kind of dip their foot in the pool a little bit and gain some knowledge? Where would you steer them?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I have a habit of reading, business books and then starting in my own mind to connect the dots kind of back to the business. Um, I think what I'm reading right now is Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, and just talking
Yeah,
about the
it's a
fact
good book.
that business doesn't have a finite beginning and end, and the successful organizations out there really have this philosophy of an infinite game in mind. And if I think about that and I apply that to security, it really is it's very similar, right? those specific one-off items. What's the root cause, right? Understanding root cause.
Yes. Yes. And that allows you then to solve for all of them, right? Versus just one at a time or whenever it becomes a threat. And so this leads to something too that I find very interesting about especially what you do is since there is evolving problems and new threats and things that seem to occur every day, there is this whole idea, is it about being proactive or reactive? Because I think what I see the most of today in security is people are very reactive. And can you touch on how you try to be proactive? Because I know that's one thing you guys do very well at Octellient.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And I've seen that, and as mentioned earlier, right? This whole threat hunting notion coming to the forefront is really about being proactive. From a technology, from a hunting perspective, and understanding what's going on in the environment. But even taking that back up and tying it back into the business, right? Having that communication, having board and senior leaders, senior business leaders understand what is happening around security in their organization can certainly move things to a more proactive approach because they can make changes more rapidly when they have some base understanding of what it really means. If every time I have a situation come up and the sky is falling and I take that up to senior leadership, right, there's this cry wolf kind of opportunity, come to the forefront. I don't know,
Yeah,
potentially, I guess.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there's no doubt that we're very lucky that there are people like you in the market that are really out there making change and really making a difference. And so, we're just so excited that you took this leap into Octellient, and there's no doubt in my mind you were going to drive incredible results and success for your customers. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking this time today. I know you are very, very busy, and but this was a great conversation, and I feel like the people listening here today will have a much better understanding of what you do, why you do it, and why you're the best at what you do. So congratulations on your new company.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate it. And thanks for the conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.